my true crimers. Welcome to All True Crime with Jody ASMR. So tonight we're doing a true crime story, and before we start, I just want to put out a warning. This is a true crime story, and if anybody under the age of 14 should not be watching this. And even then, if your discretion is severely advised. The thing is that if you have any triggers with murder, with rape, with child abuse, with any kind of gruesome details, tonight's story is not for you. Because tonight's story is the story of the Gainesville Ripper, Danny Rollings. Danny Rollings was a troubled individual. He was abused his whole life from the day he was born. And unfortunately, he took all of that anger and rage out on his victims. And in one fateful weekend, I guess, or 2 days, he took the entire town of Gainesville and turned it upside down by murdering 5 people. 4 were from University of Florida, and 1 was from Santa Fe College. But let's start from where this all began. Shreveport, Louisiana. Claudia and James Rollings had 2 children, Kevin and Danny. And on October 25th, 1954, Danny Rollings was born, the second of 2 children that were not wanted by the Rollings. James Rollings was a chief lieutenant for the Shreveport Police Department and said to his wife before they got married and made it very clear that he did not want children at all. But they could have adopted them out. They could have given them to many couples that probably would have loved to have loved these 2 children. But instead he kept them there and he abused them physically and verbally. And Danny was just a more sensitive one. That's not weak. Sensitive. And I'm not sticking up for what he did, but we all start somewhere. And, I'm not going to leave out his parents without blame here. I'm not going to say, that it was all him and he has nobody but to blame but himself. I'm not going to say that. Because the way his father and mother abused him was, it wasn't as bad as some cases, but let me tell you, it was every single day of his life. From the day he was born. I hate you, you're an embarrassment, you're, nothing, I don't want you, I never wanted you. Then why wouldn't you give him up for adoption? Then James Rollings did this to both his children, but especially to Danny. When Danny was a baby, he started it then, and babies understand more. They can feel how much you love them and care for them. And that's really when their brain starts to develop emotions and, the red matter, the processing part, the feelings, the emotions, the caring, the compassion for people. And this is where his parents fell short, definitely in his early years. When Danny was just a boy, he had a dog he really, really loved. And his dad beat the dog so many times that lying in injuries Danny's father had put upon this poor dog. Can you imagine? Danny was beat regularly for breathing too loud. I don't know how a child can breathe too loud, but apparently his father, James, would beat him for breathing too loud. And even though Danny Rollings in the end became a serial killer, in the beginning he wasn't. And we are all innocent when we're little. And unfortunately, he just couldn't handle the beatings his father constantly gave him. And his mother would leave his father, bringing hope to Danny that she was going to get him out of the situation, but never really loved him. She would just keep bringing him back to the same abuse constantly. And his whole life, that's what he lived through. So the anger towards his mom had turned into resentment and rage because she could have protected him. She didn't have to beat him. His father, she didn't have to allow his father to beat him. There are two playing this game here, And I think that he tried to fit into society. He really did. When he was 14, he was caught looking into a young girl's bedroom window watching her undress, and he was beat severely for that. Danny went to church. He joined the Air Force, and he just never really fit in. I mean, he tried to assimilate into society. He got married at 23, but his wife left him after a few short years when he threatened to kill her, because that's what he knew. He didn't know how to be in a relationship that was healthy. Danny's troubles also started really when he raped a girl that looked like his ex-wife, and then he killed a girl in a car accident. Now, this was not on purpose, but it troubled him further. Society didn't want him, his parents didn't want him, nobody wanted him, and that really, he just was about to explode. Now in Shreveport, Louisiana, a young adult, late teenager, he would go to Alabama and break into banks, supermarkets, different stores, and he finally got caught and was arrested. And that was in Alabama, which is very close to Florida, right? So he then comes back, and he never could really hold down a job, but he does hold a job at Poncho's restaurant as a waiter for a little while. And then in early 1990, he gets fired from his job, and he has a outrageously horrific argument with his father about the family, about how he treated him, and he literally took out an eye of his father's, and he took off most of his ear. So this was a terrible fight. Now, if you kind of put the timeline together, this is 1990, the same year as the Gainesville Ripper would enter into Florida, otherwise known as Danny Rollings. So I find that to be interesting. I feel like the pressure, almost like a pressure cooker. He is now pissed, and he's leaving Shreveport, Louisiana. He's leaving his parents, he's leaving his home. He's now done with his ex-wife is done with him. He's killed a girl by a car. He's raped a girl. He's been beaten and abused his whole life. He is a pressure pot ready to blow. And he needs to take out his rage somewhere. And unfortunately, in late August, Danny Rollings will travel into Florida, into Gainesville, Florida, and turn over this little town on its head. So, his first victims being Miss Powell and Miss Larson were both University of Florida students, 17 and 18, I believe. He enters their apartment through the sliding glass door with a key jack and a screwdriver, which is his tools of choice for breaking into their houses. And he had planned on burglarizing them, but I guess he hesitated as he saw Miss Powell asleep on the sofa. Looked over her body for quite a while. She did not wake up, but he passed her and entered her into Miss Larson's room, where he then put tape over her mouth to hush the screams and proceeded to stab her in the back. Once he was done with her, I don't think he sexually assaulted her, but he did stab her and murder her, clean her body, and pose her in a very inappropriate position. And a lot of times he would use mirrors and different pieces of furniture to make it more shocking to the people who were going to find these victims, and nobody ever really knows why. I think it's because he wanted to be known for something really horrific. And we'll find out a little bit later what he says. So then he goes into the family room where Miss Powell is still asleep on the couch. And he proceeds to put her on her face, turn her over. He ties her hands behind her back, tapes her mouth, and then sexually assaults her before stabbing her 5 times in the back, killing her. Then he would clean the bodies with vinegar and pose her in a very inappropriate position. I'm not going to go into gruesome detail that you can always find online. I'm just giving the accounts of this tiny town's horrific endowment in 1990. So the next day would be the 25th or 26th of October, and the first murder would take place in the early morning, so it was around 3, 4 in the morning that he had come in. But the next victim was a 20, let's say, she was a 18-year-old Miss Hoyt, and she was also a student. She was coming home from class. Now, he had broken into our apartment the same way through the sliding glass window with his key jack and her K-Rod and his screwdriver, prying open the window and going in. Now, he found that she was not home, so he sat and we waited for her to come home at 11:30 a.m. when her class was done, and she strolled into her house. He had taken her by surprise by a chokehold and proceeded to tie her hands behind her back, tape her mouth, sexually assault her, stabbing her 3 or 4 times, but one going directly into the heart. here's the thing. Earlier that day, there was a bank robbery early in the morning right next to Miss Hoyt's house. And they believe that Danny Rollings was the one who committed this crime, because when he was eventually apprehended for something completely irrelevant to this case, to these murders, a bag of money was found on him, so he was believed to have been the perpetrator in that crime. So he leaves our house, he leaves Miss Hoyt's house, and he's frantic because he realizes that he left his wallet there, or he thinks he does. And he goes back to her house, and there she is. And I don't know why he decides to do this, but he decapitates Miss Hoyt and puts her head up on a shelf, facing her own deceased body, and then leaves that behind. So the people that will eventually find her will be even that more shocked. Now, she is the third victim in this case so far that we know of. And the last two, Miss Bolas and Manny, it's also in the early morning, they're sleeping, and he decides to kill Manny first, but he doesn't pose Manny's body, just kills him. And then he goes to Miss Bolas and he puts her hands behind her back, tapes her mouth, sexually assaults her, and poses her in a very inappropriate way. I'm sure with some kind of prop to make it even that more horrific for somebody that walked in and found them. And the only reason really he killed Manny was because he was there. Now, the thing is with Bolas is that she really fought. She woke up during Manny's murder and tried to barricade herself in her room because she must have been out on the couch or in the family room or something. And she's screaming and she's barricading herself in, and unfortunately he makes his way into her room and ends up killing her. So, she was this close from actually getting away. So, at this point, Danny leaves. I guess he leaves town and heads out, but the police are walking into these murders after murder after murder, and they're like, what is going on? Holy crap. I mean, it's within 3 days he had killed 5 people. That's insane. I mean, his rage is just boiling over. So they had it's a little town. I don't know if you've ever been to Gainesville, but it's like you go through one road and you're done, and that's it. And it's cow country after that, and farms and stuff. So there is not a lot of people in this surrounding area. So they kind of bake it on this kid who had a background of mental illness and had been in a car accident and had a lot of scars on his face. So he looked more menacing, obviously, than he was, and he wasn't the killer. But the media took this information and just put it everywhere, put his face everywhere, saying he was the Gainesville Ripper. And that was not the case. So the media had done a huge injustice to this kid. But not only that, they slowed down the investigation, because they could have just cleared the kid and been, over it. But they really had him pegged as the murderer, which was too bad. Now, there was another suspect, but they never really named him. And really, Danny probably would never caught, except for it was his own devices and his own greed, I guess, that got him eventually found. Because in Ocala, which is not that far from Gainesville, Florida, it's still in Florida though, it's a tiny little town. Even now, today, it's growing, but it's still tiny, so back then it was very, very small. He robs a supermarket and gets caught, and he's in jail. Now this is 10 days after his last murder in Gainesville. Only 10. So when they apprehend him, on his person he had a gun, he had tape, he had the gauge check and the screwdriver and a bag of money, which confused completely confused these police officers who had no idea what was going on just a little ways up in Gainesville. But see, there's this story that starts to unfold into the United States and leaks out, obviously, to nationwide television because of the horrific nature of these crimes. And the Shreveport detectives say, that is a lot like this murder that was committed here in 1989. It was a man who was 55, a young boy who was 8, and a woman, Julie, who was 24 years old at the time. And the two men the 8-year-old and the 55-year-old man were killed, but not posed, they were just killed. And then Julie was the woman. She actually was the same thing. She was sexually assaulted, tied up, stabbed in the back. Her body was mutilated, and that was another thing I didn't mention before. You mutilated all of these women's bodies, like really mutilated them, and just did sick things to them before he posed them in strange, inappropriate positions. Now, the same woman, this woman in Shreveport, Louisiana, had been posed the same way, and her body had been mutilated, very similar to the women in Gainesville, and she looked like all the women did in Gainesville. And apparently his ex-wife did too, because his mother was really said to be the one that he was trying to kill. He was taking, all his rage out on her because he picked women that were petite, brunette, and, brown eyes, not that tall, and little, skinny, like his mother. So every one of the women that he murdered and mutilated and posed in these bizarre positions and decapitated one, and throughout time it looked just like his mother, and apparently his ex-wife too. So the Shreveport detective calls the Gainesville detective and says, hey, I have a very similar case. So how did they all get linked together? Because at this point, he's just sitting in jail for, breaking into a supermarket. He's not in there for murder. Nobody even knows it's him. His name has not even come up. They don't even know who did the murders in Shreveport. That's the thing. The detective is just calling Florida's Gainesville detective saying, look, this is very similar to my crime. It's probably the same guy. So they're trying to connect the dots. Well, there's this other woman who had been actually, her and her husband at the time went to the same church as Danny Rollings, and they would have him over every night. And he and his husband would sit and they'd talk, and she'd make dinner or whatever, and they'd have some I'm sure he's not going to kill anybody. He's just saying that he's drunk or whatever. Apparently Danny had done a lot of drugs, a lot of LSD. Had actually done over 100 hits of acid in his life, so he may not have all been there from that too. But he did do drugs and drink heavily most of his life. And Cindy is driving through the Panhandle listening to this story about the people in Shreveport and the Gainesville Ripper out there connected, and then thinking about what her husband told her about Danny Rollings. So she actually calls the Crime Stoppers, and she said that they need to look into Danny Rollings. That she believes she tells them the whole story. That's right, Crime Stoppers. As she's driving through the Panhandle, listening to this on her radio, right? And she said it was just eating at her that she had to call it in. So she calls it in to Crime Stoppers. They call, both police departments and say, look, maybe this gal has something. This is a tip. It connects Shreveport to Gainesville, to Danny, to what he said, to his upbringing, you can put the dots together eventually. Well, see, when they actually didn't have to go very far to find him because he was already in jail in Ocala, and they arrive in Ocala, and Danny basically just tells them everything. Why does he do that so easily? Well, I guess he had made his mark. He always said he wanted to be a superstar like Ted Bundy. I don't know, but I don't consider Ted Bundy a superstar. Maybe super horrific, but if that was a superstar in his mind, he accomplished that. And this is what I was saying earlier, that I think he did such strange things to the bodies because I think he wanted to make a name for himself even bigger than Ted Bundy had. Well, he got his wish. It took 4 years to go to trial for these murders. So Danny's in prison in Florida for 4 years before his trial actually began. And a month before his trial started in 1994, he just confessed to everything. He said, I did it all. So I'm pleading guilty. And he said, okay, well, the state attorney still had to decide on the sentencing because they went for the death penalty. And during this, court TV had actually called his parents and his mom, talking to his mother on the phone, and you can hear Danny's father screaming at her in the background, or screaming about Danny or whatever in the background. So, that just kind of telling what kind of life he lived. His dad's constantly screaming, he's worthless, he's nothing, he's an embarrassment. At one point in his life, it was, I think, 14 or 15, Danny's dad literally forced his face into the grass, into the dirt, pinned him on the ground, tied his hands behind his back, and called the police on him, and said, get him out of my face because he's an embarrassment to me. Well, okay, well, that made it clear, for sure. So now, the prosecution wants the death penalty, obviously, so they go to trial for this. And they get it April 20th, 1994. Danny is sentenced to death by lethal injection. The death penalty is set in motion for Danny, and he is given his last meal October 25th, 2006 of a lobster tail, and he doesn't say anything about the murders. It never does. He just, as he's going in, he's humming a tune, a gospel hymn. And he just never says anything. Now, the poor victims, family members were there, all to watch. I mean, there's a lot of people there for his execution, for the murders. And he just didn't give them that, but what he did give the people in Shreveport, Louisiana, and the victims of that family, that poor family he murdered in 1989, he did give them a written confession, a full confession, that he was the one who was the person that killed that family. But no reason why. Why? Other than she must have looked like his mother, because that seemed to be what they had concluded that he wanted to. He was really punishing his mother for abusing him and not protecting him the way she should have his whole life. How he was given a cocktail of lethal drugs, and he was dead on October 25th at 6:13 p.m. in the evening. In total, killed 8 people horrifically, innocent people that didn't deserve to die at all. He almost killed his father, which may have helped, actually. I know that sounds strange, but maybe if he did actually kill his father, then he would have been in prison. And I don't even think he spent a night in jail for that. I didn't read where he did. So, not that that was the focus of the story, but if he had killed his father, it would have probably saved those 5 lives. I mean, that is the sad truth, and probably his father definitely deserved it than those poor kids. That is for sure. Do you think now this is a question, just think about, do you think that since his parents did not want him, since the day he was born, and did not want his brother Kevin either, do you think that Danny's life would have been different if he had a loving family that nurtured him and took care of him? Because I was reading in the court documents, they did say he had borderline personality disorder and personality disorder and pedophilia, or it means sexual perversion. It's kind of an ambiguous term for somebody who gets turned on by weird or cruel things. Do you think he would have been a different person? Do you think he would have been not a murderer? I can't help but wonder why, what his life would have been like if he had 2 parents that took care of him, that loved him, that told him he was a great kid every day, and didn't murder his puppy in front of him by beating him, or beat him because he was breathing too loud.